Hello, History 022. It's Colonel Gallagher. I'm back again one more time. Do a video for you real quick on the Industrial Revolution, just in case you get quarantined or otherwise, or maybe you just have insomnia. What I'm going to talk about is the Industrial Revolution, the very beginning, and I'm just going to give you a real brief, brief sense. I'm not going to get too detailed on this. And where I'm going to start with is really the idea that Americans, the old joke in history was with American history, the Americans had one revolution that was good enough, and they didn't want any more after that. We're going to talk about a different revolution. This is a revolution called the capitalist revolution or the industrial revolution. And we're talking about a period right after the American Civil War, 1865 on. Now, it's really actually fomented or really developed during the American Civil War, the growth in capitalistic structure because of the banking and the need for finance during the war. But also, the more important part is the development, kind of an unfinished revolution of the railroads. And so that's going to require a large amount of labor and a large amount of, here we go, the magic word, capital. You got to get the financing. Now, with this word revolution, when you look at this in this period of 1865, there's two gentlemen that you have to know that came out of the year 1776. Isn't that a wonderful date to use with the American history? And in 1776, you had a man named Thomas Jefferson who penned something called the Declaration of Independence. And in that Declaration of Independence, Jefferson really sat down and put out the ideas, the fundamental ideas of the American identity known as democracy. That if you go through the Declaration of Independence in the second paragraph, it mentions very clearly that all people are born with the same natural rights. Okay, that's life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. These are natural rights that you're blessed with. And then the second part that comes important in that second paragraph is that government is instituted. Literally, I'm taking a word out of there. It's created amongst the people. There's a democratic view. There's a democratic revolution. And so the government and the people, have this wonderful relationship. In other words, the people literally are the government, and that's the democratic design. You vote, I vote. That's the power that we're given. And this is a tremendous amount of, here's the word, freedom. Okay. And in that freedom, we're allowed to operate the best we can. But in that freedom, we have this sense of equality. I vote, you vote. There is this sense of an equality amongst us, all born with the same natural rights, equal. In 1776, there was another gentleman, okay, over in the English area, a Scotsman, who came up with an idea. His name was Adam Smith, and he came up with an idea, wrote some things down called The Wealth of Nations in this large volume that came out of his lectures and in a course he taught. And he became known as an economist, okay, but he's really more of an ethicist, ethics. And his Wealth of Nations, the backbone of it is what we call capitalism, a free enterprise system. Now, to Jefferson, the idea and the principles in it were that of equality when you look at it, okay? All created with the same natural rights. When you look at Smith, entwined in there was another great, powerful idea that seems to be in relationship, very nice relationship with the democratic idea of equality, was that of freedom. In a capitalistic system, and Smith would point out, is that we have this drive within us, this self-interest, and we're born with this. There's a natural set of circumstances born with, and with this self-interest, we desire to improve our station in life, and we desire to grow, and this would be an economic value. And in doing so, that we produce these goods. We produce this capitalistic system. And in doing that, we're allowed to, here's what, freely enter into the market. Okay. And so what happens is this natural law, there's words of supply and demand enter the picture. And that entices us to become part of this process. So when you look at it, it seems like the two would go together. These dual ideas, these two ideas, democratic, capitalist, okay, they would work together. However, not only were they dual in that nature, another play on words, a synonym, or a homonym, sorry, dual, to fight, D-U-E-L. And so these two would duel with each other because capitalism, ironically, cannot work off of the word equality. Capitalism is anything but equal. It contradicts the very essence when you look at that democratic design. However, in democracy, we want to have that equality. So now you have this problem of labor and owner entering into this relationship. You have consumer and manufacturer entering into this relationship. And so it complicates some things. And kind of like the period of the day, in order to have this steam engine, which was the powerful part of the Industrial Revolution. The only way a steam engine can move and operate is through opposing forces. So democracy and capitalism had to learn how to operate together. The first revolution of 1776, which set down these principles of government of a democratic design, now we're in conflict with another revolution that was going on about 100 years later in this industrial system, a capitalist revolution. Okay, so how do you make it right? How do you make it work? And what entered into the picture eventually, as Adam Smith would want, is this competition in the marketplace that should be naturally occurring. You started to see it wane, and you started to see these folks dominate, just like you would have, I guess, in a religious sense, a trinity, the trinity that began to see these three gentlemen that started to emerge in the American industrial society that we would call the trinity in this sense for capitalism were none other than, and these are famous names, uh, John Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, and last but not least, J.P. Morgan. Rockefeller made a lot of his money through a system called horizontal integration. Okay, he took all the oil refineries and controlled them and then pulled them together. And by doing so, he controlled that part of the production. Carnegie did vertical integration, where he owned how to produce the steel. That was his thing from the very beginning to the very end. He would own the coal mines, he would own the iron ore mines, he would own the railroad transportation system, he'd own the facilities to produce the necessary iron. So he owned every part from the beginning to end to make that one product, and that's vertical integration. J.P. Morgan was a financier, and he dominated the finances. And so the big banking, if you needed any kind of capital banking, you had to go to J.P. Morgan. These are the three great trinities. What they created was, a monopoly. And so this is the Great American Edition. And so in the Great American Edition of Monopoly, it's not that we don't like monopolies. We love monopolies. Hold on a second. I got a quick message. Okay, and so what we have here is we have this monopoly that's going on. And so you start to see these people controlling these industries, and you can name just about any product and you'd have a monopoly for it. And to some Americans, this created a deep problem because in the world of business, these people who are these economic giants now had undue influence in politics. Now, here's where we go. The two do this dance together. It's not that economics and politics are separate. That's absurd. They're together. And so the political situation now became kind of, and I'm gonna steal from a historian named H.W. Brands, who has this incredible, wonderful chapter in a book that says the finest government money can buy. And now you have a corruption that entered the picture. This corruption was very well noted in the post-Civil War era, 1865 on. And you have tons of examples of these, and you have quite a few in your textbook that are really good with this. And the one I'm gonna give you an example of, the influence politically as well as economically, is gonna be a guy who you may never heard of before. And this is a man named William Marcy Boss Tweed. Boss Tweed was in New York City. He ran for one political office in his whole tenure as an alderman. He really didn't like politics. Then he figured it out. He didn't want to become a politician. He wanted to make politicians. Just as a tailor would make a suit of clothes, he could make politicians. And so he became known as this political boss. There was this political machine, these groups of people who controlled the voting in New York City called Tammany Hall. Tammany Hall goes way back to Alexander's time. And so Tweed entered into this picture as a Democratic. Hold on, I'm sorry. And so Tweed entered into this picture. And so let me give you one quick example. In New York City, they wanted to build this incredible courthouse. And Tweed suggested that they build it and make it the finest and the grandest in the world because New York City deserved no less. And so they went about and the city said, okay, fine, we'll pay the fee. Now this money, man, is coming from the taxpayers. Now Tweed, as he got this money to build this courthouse, some of the money that was being spent was, for example, $180,000 went to a furniture maker to make a table and 40 chairs. The old joke was one for each thief. $180,000. This is 1869. Okay, so out of that $180,000, how does this work? Well, the furniture maker didn't get $180,000. A kickback was now used. So you'd pay $180,000 of the furniture maker, and then the Tweed ring, as it was called, it was like a ring, a little round of people there, and these were the people who were taking the money from. These were the ring that was stealing the money from the people. Now Tweed would get 2 for 1. So out of that $180,000, Tweed and his guys would get two for every dollar that the contractor got. Now, if you take 180,000 divided into thirds, let's say, what you end up doing is the contractor got about $60,000, and the Tweed ring got 120,000 of that. Okay, how much will that be today? $60,000 in 1869 would be over $2 million. The furniture maker, the Tweed ring on that one $180,000 scam made over almost $6 million. Okay, so you kind of see that the people, and by the way, is finally, it took years and years and years, over a decade later, this courthouse is being constructed. For heaven's sakes, one window cost over $8,000, 1869. People are being ripped off. The money is going to Tweed and his cronies, they're ripping the people off. Now, how could Tweed maintain control? Because if you want to be the mayor of New York City, if you want to be anything in New York City, Tweed had the votes. And what he would do is go down and make sure that he had this population that he had in control of. He would give them bags of coal. He would do these favors for them. He became this political boss, everybody's best friend. And who he's placating to is the poor. The poor were very, very fortunate to have Tweed, they said, because Tweed would come and see them and visit them. He'd go to the bat mitzvahs when they're Jewish. He would go to witness their children being christened, if they're a Catholic. But more importantly, he'd help them get a job and things like this. Tweed would do these favors, and then at the end of the day, what would happen is a group of people would come around, collect these folks up, take them down to the poll, and they'd vote. Now, how the voting worked was very interesting. Men would grow these beards. And what you could do is you get 4 good votes out of one guy, Tweed said. If you take them, you get them, they have a full beard, they go and they'd vote, and then you'd shave up a little bit of the beard, and they'd go back and they'd vote again, and you just kept shaving down until they had a clean face, so you could get 1, 2, 3, 4 votes out of one person. Is that democratic? No, it's cheating. He had other ways, but in other words, Tweed would manipulate the ballot system, and he would guarantee the person, whoever's going to be mayor or police chief, he would guarantee him that position. He would cheat. And by doing so, he maintained control, because when that person would become police chief or mayor, they owed Tweed the favor. And Tweed then would make sure that that mayor, who could appoint a lot of different people into city departments, that they would appoint somebody that Tweed suggested. And that way Tweed could maintain control of that city department, and he could maintain control of the flow of the money and the decisions being made. Tweed owned New York City. This is one example of one person in one city. All the other cities in the United States was exactly the same. And so this was kind of how it was going. Democracy was in trouble, put it bluntly. And this was a way to maintain control. Now, as far as the monopolies go, it was the same thing. There was a massive influence. Money controlled the political system. And so if you had somebody in the Senate that was going to pass a bill, you would have somebody that you would have, let's say I'm an oil guy, I could control, and I'd have somebody from Michigan, and they would be not known as a senator from Michigan, they'd be known as a senator, the oil senator. Or we'd have somebody known as the steel senator. And we would then pay them off, we would give them all kinds of gifts, and we would also give them kickbacks, there's that word again, from any kind of contract. And they would make sure that the legislation favors us. They would make sure that they protect us, basically. So you had this problem going on in the American system. And what you had is this, oh no, the system of the crazy combinations, the game of crazy combinations, not apples to apples, this is period of time. You had all these combinations because you had people like Carnegie and Tweed, and then you had Rockefeller, who controlled these businesses and then could manipulate this. They became kings themselves. And so the American democratic tradition seemed to be in jeopardy. This equality was now imbalanced, because capitalism has to work off of inequality. All right. Not only that, but for labor, for workers, how would this affect them? Because workers are people. So you had to then start to understand that workers as individuals had rights. So this is going to complicate the mix, and we'll get to that later on down the road. So you had all these rings going on in the city, whether it was the Tweed ring or my favorite one, the gold ring. They had a gold ring run by a guy named Jay Gould and Jim Fisk. And they tried to corner the market on gold, came very close to it. And so they learned how the market could be manipulated very easily. By the market being manipulated very easily, it meant it was very unstable. This was not good for investors like, say, myself or you, who's a very common average person who wants to invest in the market. You could lose everything. And so this wasn't fair. This wasn't right. There had to be new rules put in place. He didn't want to destroy democracy. Okay. But now what seemed to be taking place was this thing called plutocracy. Like you talk about Pluto, okay, whether it's a planet or not, whatever it is now, but Pluto. And so with Pluto, Pluto is the god of wealth. So you had instead of a democratic system of the masses, you had this plutocracy developed with these large capitalistic folks who had large amounts of money. It's not that capitalism's evil or bad. It was that it was unbridled in this sense, and it was allowed to be going unchecked. See, that's why you got to be kidding, because everyone would say in this period of time something had to happen, and it would. And it's because you're in a democratic society, by the way. It's not the opposite. It's not that, my God, we're in a democratic society, so democracy creates this problem. That's absolutely absurd. It was in the fact that it was people who published newspapers. For example, you go back to Tweed. What brought Tweed down was a young cartoonist who came from Holland named Thomas Nast, who drew these cartoons of Tweed ripping the people off. And that's what brought him down. It was good journalism. It was a guy named Mark Twain who wrote books, who exposed what became known as the Gilded Age, and he showed it for what it was. Okay, it's not that it was purely evil. It was not that it was purely all good. That's the way our society has always been. That's the way people have always been. It's the choices that we make, and that's why when people say in an education, what matters the most? Ethics. But what also matters the most in education is that you have a firm understanding of how systems work. And that how, in a democratic system, for heaven's sakes, you get to be a participant. But in a capitalist system, you do as well. Isn't that wonderful? And that's the beauty of that. But there was all this going on in this period of 1865 to 1900, rocking the nation. And what needed to happen was you needed to have a good set of laws, but you also needed a different structural system. You had to save democracy by creating greater democratic opportunities, believe it or not. We'll talk about that with a group called the Progressives coming up. Okay, so hang on. I know it took almost 20 minutes, but this is, believe it or not, short. I'm trying to condense so much in such a short time. I hope you're doing okay. If you watch this, thank you very much. And if you have any questions, let me know. Drop me an email or come see me during tutoring time. I'd be happy to talk. It's good to be back. You have a wonderful day.